A 27-year-old convicted killer orchestrated a daring jail escape, evading authorities for nearly 5 months before being captured in a dramatic standoff over 500 miles from where his reign of terror began.
A convicted killer who spent almost 5 months on the run after escaping a prison in New Orleans is back behind bars tonight after being arrested in Georgia.
Derrick Groves and 9 others broke out of the Orleans Parish Justice Center in May. This afternoon, law enforcement found Groves after raiding a home on Honeysuckle Lane near West Cedar Lane in southwest Atlanta.
Derrick Groves, grandson of a woman murdered in one of New Orleans' most notorious police corruption cases, had become the very embodiment of violence his family had once fought against. The story of Derrick Groves is inextricably woven into the fabric of New Orleans' darkest criminal history. Born in 1997, nearly 3 years after his grandmother Kim Groves was murdered in a police-ordered hit, Derrick would grow up in the shadow of that tragedy. His grandmother, a 32-year-old mother of 3, had been shot to death outside her lower Ninth Ward home in 1994 by hitman Paul Hardy, at the order of corrupt NOPD patrol officer Len Davis. Kim Groves' crime had been simple and devastating. She had filed a police brutality complaint against Davis, who led a drug ring for years while wearing a badge. Davis received the death penalty for ordering the killing, though President Joe Biden would later commute his sentence to life in December 2024. The murder left Kim Groves' 3 children, Jasmine, Corey, and Stephanie, to navigate a world shattered by violence and corruption. Corey Groves told the court years later that he had been reduced to near homelessness, while one of his sisters resorted to pawning items to survive. The family would eventually receive a $1.5 million settlement from the city 23 years after Kim's death, but the money could never restore what was taken. Jasmine Groves became a vocal advocate for police oversight, channeling her grief into activism. Yet the cycle of violence that claimed her mother would eventually ensnare her nephew. Derrick Groves' entry into violent crime began early. At 17 he was charged with shooting and critically injuring his godfather, Christopher Bush, in a 2014 incident in the Holy Cross neighborhood. Bush survived the shooting but left behind a written statement absolving Groves of blame. State prosecutors Michael Trummell and Matt Harrison argued during the trial that Bush had written the exculpatory statement out of fear for his life, presenting witness testimony to support their theory. The jury disagreed, finding Groves not guilty in a 10-2 vote. Bush would later be killed in a separate shooting before Groves faced trial, taking whatever truth he possessed to his grave. The acquittal appeared to embolden Groves rather than redirect him. By 2017 he was connected to the killing of Woodrow Smith in the Desire area, a case to which he would eventually plead guilty to manslaughter. Federal authorities also began building a case against him for drug trafficking charges, painting a picture of a young man deeply embedded in the lower Ninth Ward's criminal underworld. But it was Mardi Gras Day 2018 that would cement Derrick Groves' place in New Orleans criminal history. What should have been a day of celebration, of music and parades and joy in a city that knew how to mark the occasion, became instead a scene of carnage that would leave 2 young men dead and 3 others wounded, forever scarring a community already well acquainted with violence. On February 13, 2018, as New Orleans reveled in Mardi Gras festivities, a house party was underway in the lower Ninth Ward. Among those in attendance was Richard "Bam" Green, a heroin dealer who was partying with friends. Also present were 26-year-old Jamar Robinson and 21-year-old Byron Jackson, 2 young men whose lives were about to be cut brutally short. Investigators would later determine that Groves and his accomplice, Kendall Barnes, had been hired to kill Green. What followed was an attack so vicious, so indiscriminate, that prosecutors would describe it as unleashing holy hell. Armed with AK-47 assault rifles, Groves and Barnes opened fire on the group gathered outside the home. The weapons designed for warfare tore through the crowd with devastating efficiency. Robinson and Jackson were killed, their bodies falling on a day meant for celebration. 3 others were wounded, their lives forever altered by the physical and emotional scars they would carry. Green, the alleged target, survived. The shooting was over in moments, but its impact would reverberate for years. Witnesses to the massacre were immediately confronted with a terrible choice: speak to police and risk retaliation, or remain silent and let the killers walk free. Special Agent in Charge Lionel Murthel of the FBI would later speak about Groves' pattern of using violence to silence witnesses, creating a climate of fear in the lower Ninth Ward. Groves routinely used violence to lash out and silence witnesses or snitches, Myrtle stated. There was no doubt in the minds of anyone involved in this case that Groves would continue his bloody rampage on the streets of New Orleans if he weren't stopped. The investigation that followed the Mardi Gras massacre was a masterclass in multi-agency cooperation. Lead Detective Maggie Darling of the New Orleans Police Department worked closely with FBI Special Agent James Ollinger to build a case against Groves and Barnes. The evidence they compiled was overwhelming and multifaceted. 3 eyewitnesses courageously came forward, identifying Groves and Barnes as the gunmen despite the obvious danger this posed to their own lives. Cell phone records dismantled Groves' alibi, placing him definitively at the scene of the shooting. Ballistic testing confirmed that AK-47s had been used in the attack, their distinctive markings leaving no doubt about the weapons employed. But perhaps most damning was Groves' own behavior in the days following the murders. His social media activity revealed an alarming familiarity with the weapons used and brazenly boasted about the violence. Groves took credit for the killings online, his posts serving as a digital confession that would prove invaluable to prosecutors. Forensic experts including FBI agent William "Chuck" Williams, Crystal Bender and Kenneth Leary meticulously processed every piece of evidence, ensuring that the case against Groves would be airtight. Groves and Barnes were arrested and charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and multiple counts of attempted second-degree murder. In October 2019, both men were convicted by a jury. For the families of Jamar Robinson and Byron Jackson, it seemed like justice had finally been served after nearly 2 years of waiting. But the legal saga was far from over. In 2020, the Supreme Court ruled that non-unanimous jury verdicts were unconstitutional, a landmark decision that affected hundreds of cases across Louisiana. Groves' 2019 conviction had been secured with a non-unanimous jury, meaning he was entitled to a new trial. The families of the victims who had already endured the trauma of one trial would have to relive their nightmare again. The retrial process became a grueling test of endurance for everyone involved. A trial scheduled for January 2023 ended in mistrial after one of the 12 jurors improperly read media accounts of the case, violating the court's instructions. A subsequent trial in June 2023 ended with a deadlocked jury, unable to reach the unanimous verdict now required by law. District Attorney Jason Williams, who personally participated in the trial teams for the second and third trials, witnessed firsthand the re-traumatization of the families. Being a part of the trial team for the second and third trials, I was able to see up close the re-traumatization of the families and next of kin involved, Williams said. Finally, in October 2024, more than 6 years after the Mardi Gras murders, a jury delivered a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Groves was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of Robinson and Jackson, and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder for the injuries to the other victims. The convictions carried mandatory life sentences. Assistant District Attorneys Forrest Ladd and Zachary Creel, who led the prosecution, had meticulously rebuilt the case to meet the new legal standards. The evidence they presented convinced all 12 jurors that Groves was guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. On the same day as his conviction, Groves pleaded guilty to 2 additional manslaughter charges stemming from separate killings: the 2017 death of Woodrow Smith and the 2019 slaying of Tyrone Francis in the lower Ninth Ward. Assistant District Attorney Forrest Ladd addressed the significance of this moment. This has been a long journey for these families, and this is a great day for the city of New Orleans. Derrick Groves is a heinous criminal who reigned terror in the lower Ninth Ward for well over a decade, and that reign of terror has ended. Groves was scheduled to be formally sentenced on December 5, 2024, before Judge Kimya Holmes. But that sentencing hearing would never take place as planned. On May 16, 2025, during a routine head count at the Orleans Parish Justice Center, authorities made a shocking discovery. 10 inmates were missing, including Derrick Groves. The convicted killer had escaped. The details of the jailbreak revealed a carefully orchestrated plan. A maintenance worker, Sterling Williams, was arrested for his alleged involvement in the escape. According to court documents, Williams turned off the water during the breakout, allowing the inmates to remove a toilet and escape through a hole in the wall behind it. Williams claimed he acted under duress, saying that inmate Antoine Massey threatened to shank him if he didn't cooperate. Williams also told investigators that Groves tried to take his phone away and attempted to get Williams to give Groves' cousin, who was also incarcerated, a book containing Cash App information. The escape sent shockwaves through New Orleans. For the families of Groves' victims, the news was devastating. Robinson's family members went into hiding, speaking to reporters only on condition of anonymity. They had visited Robinson's gravesite to celebrate his birthday just 2 days before the escape, never imagining they would soon be fleeing in fear for their own lives. Several attorneys involved in Groves' prosecution also fled the state with their families, citing concerns for their safety. Of the 10 escapees, most were captured within days. But Derrick Groves remained at large. A massive manhunt involving local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies was launched. The FBI, U.S. Marshals, and New Orleans Police Department worked around the clock to track him down. Groves became one of the most wanted fugitives in the region, his case garnering national attention. For nearly 5 months, Groves evaded capture, gaining a measure of internet notoriety for his ability to remain free. His aunt, Jasmine Groves, made public pleas for him to turn himself in, urging her nephew to end the ordeal peacefully. "I'm calling on my nephew to turn himself in and return to jail," she stated, her words carrying the weight of a family that had already lost so much to violence. The break in the case came on October 8, 2025, when a tip was called into New Orleans Crime Stoppers. Acting on the information, the U.S. Marshals Southeast Regional Fugitive Task Force and the Atlanta Police Department converged on a residence in southwest Atlanta, near the corner of Campbellton Road and Honeysuckle Lane, over 500 miles from New Orleans. What followed was a tense standoff. Groves, cornered after months on the run, refused to surrender immediately. Law enforcement officers surrounded the location and negotiations began. Deputy U.S. Marshal Brian Fair of the Eastern District of Louisiana coordinated the operation. Finally, shortly after 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Derrick Groves was taken into custody without further violence. Fair addressed the media following the arrest, emphasizing the collaborative effort that led to Groves' capture. This was a coordinated operation between the U.S. Marshals Southeast Regional Fugitive Task Force and the Atlanta Police Department, he said. The arrest brought relief to the victims' families, who had spent months looking over their shoulders, and to the law enforcement officials who had worked tirelessly to bring Groves back into custody. Groves waived his right to an extradition hearing and was returned to Louisiana to face additional charges related to his escape. He now faced not only the life sentences from his murder convictions but also potential federal charges for escaping custody. The resolution of Derrick Groves' case highlighted both the persistence of law enforcement and the devastating cycle of violence that had consumed his life and claimed so many others. District Attorney Jason Williams reflected on the broader implications. "Our work is far from over. We will continue to stand with the victims and their families, seeking justice for every life lost to senseless violence. That is our commitment to this community." Special Agent in Charge Lionel Myrtle offered a stark assessment of Groves' legacy. "The days of Derrick Groves bullying and brutalizing this community are over. The message in this case should be crystal clear to those who choose violence in this city. We will not stop until we do everything in our power to see that justice is served." He continued, addressing the numbing effect of frequent violence. "Unfortunately, the type of violence we saw in this case happens far too often. So often in fact that it's easy, and sometimes understandable, that the community becomes numb to the impact of death." For the families of Jamar Robinson and Byron Jackson, Groves' capture represented the end of a particularly terrifying chapter in their long journey toward closure. Robinson's family emerged from hiding, finally able to visit his grave without fear. Jackson's loved ones, who had carried the weight of grief through multiple trials, mistrials, and the escape, could begin to process their loss without the added trauma of wondering if their son's killer would ever face justice. The case of Derrick Groves serves as a grim reminder of how violence begets violence, how trauma can echo across generations. Born into the aftermath of his grandmother's murder by a corrupt police officer, Groves grew up in a world where violence was normalized, where the justice system had failed his family in the most fundamental way. Yet instead of breaking the cycle, he perpetuated it, becoming a predator who terrorized the same community that had once mourned his grandmother's death. The legal proceedings against co-defendant Kendall Barnes continue, another chapter in the long saga of the 2018 Mardi Gras murders. As New Orleans continues to grapple with gun violence and the cycles of trauma that fuel it, the story of Derrick Groves stands as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the dedication of those who refuse to let violence go unanswered. The families of his victims, the law enforcement officials who never stopped searching, and the prosecutors who endured multiple trials all demonstrated that justice, while often delayed and imperfect, can still prevail. Derrick Groves remains in custody, awaiting formal sentencing and additional proceedings related to his escape. His life sentence ensures he will never again terrorize the lower Ninth Ward, never again leave families shattered by senseless violence. For a community that has known too much death, that has buried too many young men like Jamar Robinson and Byron Jackson, his capture offers a measure of peace, even as the work of healing continues.